Hi, this is Phil Parker, and what I'd like to do now is talk to you about what I believe may be the most important supervised machine learning tool that's used in strategy today. It finds its origin with Green and Rao, who did all these studies to try to reverse engineer consumer preferences, thinking that consumer preferences are largely a function of the attributes of the products that they're buying. Relatively intuitive insight, but it actually was quite profound on how it affected so many businesses. In particular, suppose I'm in a very competitive market and my objective to maximize shareholders is to literally take out the other guy, to literally take out the other competitors. If I launch a new product, what might happen is I'll cannibalize my own efforts already. So I've got to be very careful. I have to launch a product that'll only hurt the other guy. And in addition, I actually want to know at the same time, what's the maximum possible price I can charge to someone without them switching? Kind of that bend in the double kinked demand curve. At what point do people resist my offering, and how can I retain them? So the tool that was developed, and it has various names, but the most popular one is called Conjoint Analysis. Some people will say trade-off analysis, is being used by many multinational firms, and they use it at various stages of product development, product design, creating new designs and new products. So what I'd like to do is express the summary of two major applications that took place. Imagine I'm a company like Marriott, and I have to design hotels. Who designs hotels? Who is the people that are involved in that? Let's say they're architects, right? They're architects. Now, Marriott already has a hotel, let's say downtown, and they have another one at the airport. If they launch another hotel, more people will not sleep overnight in Cleveland. If they launch another hotel, there may be cannibalization. Do architects understand cross-price elasticities and cannibalization when they design a hotel? Not necessarily. Let's take Boeing as an example. They have competitors like McDonnell Douglas and Lockheed and others, and they already have certain aircraft like the 707 and the 747, etc. If they launch a new airplane, is it possible that it'll cannibalize their sales and not take out the other airlines? Do aeronautical engineers, the people responsible for aircraft design, do they actually understand cross-price elasticities and switching? Not necessarily. So how do we actually bridge the product concept at the market level, that's switching and cross-price elasticities, with the actual engineering, what the airplane should look like, what the hotel should look like? Well, let's start with hotels. What are the attributes of a hotel? You get a focus group together and they're going to start telling you things. Now, these focus groups could be architects, but they could also be consumers, of course, and they'll say things like carpet color, size of bed, number of floors, shape of the hotel. Is there a swimming pool? Is there a gym? Is there a restaurant? Is it full service, half service? What kind of quality of service is there in the hotel? What is the lighting? Is the bed near the window or far from the window? The number of attributes, it's mind-boggling, that goes into a hotel. Now let's just look at carpet color alone. How many different levels are there in carpet color? Hundreds of levels. Number of floors, various levels. Each one of these attributes, various levels. How many hotels can Marriott possibly launch? Maybe an infinite number. I mean, the possibilities are huge. Yet, we have to choose one hotel design that will not cannibalize our downtown or airport hotels, but will hurt only the competition and reach shareholder value objectives. Think about Boeing. What are the attributes of an airplane? Again, we can do focus groups to ask both engineers and frequent travelers, for example, and they'll say things like the noise of the aircraft, maybe the seating space, maybe the legroom, overhead capacity, carpet color, food service, Wi-Fi, entertainment. The list goes on and on. Within each one of those, you're going to have the same dilemma. What kind of level of food service can there be? None, just snacks, snacks you pay for, full food service, etc. That's just one attribute. For overhead space, for legroom, for seat recline, many different levels. There are hundreds of potential aircrafts that someone could launch, but you're only going to do one or two, and those have to only hurt the other company. Using this technology, we can boil down in maybe a half an hour interview or less, we can boil down those hundreds of thousands of combinations and narrow down to the space that will likely do the job. In essence, rather than measure people's perceptions, that's unsupervised machine learning and perceptual maps, now we're going to measure their preferences. So again, if I'm doing artificial intelligence, creating a robot that will act and think and breathe like a human, I would train it with perceptual mapping for its perceptions of the world, but it has to have a preference. It would prefer one product over another. We would train it using conjoint analysis. Marriott applied this, published their results. It's a fascinating study. They launched the Marriott Courtyard hotel chain. So popular, they almost had to create their own competitors against themselves. European hotel chains have very similar formulas. In France, we have the Marriott hotel chain, very similar to the Marriott Courtyard. When you walk into a Marriott, the window's open. You walk in. You don't see keys in a desk right there. That's not what you see. What do you see? You see a living room, a living space. There may even be a fireplace in Arizona. Despite it being so hot, there'll be a fireplace there. You look past the living room, and what you will observe, you'll observe something like a backyard, a courtyard with nice plants, nicer than your own home perhaps. Off to the right, there's a restaurant. Off to the left, there might be a reception area. Each one of those are worth 5 cents here, 20 cents there. We're creating a bundle. You go into your room, and what do you observe? You observe that the bathroom is near the door, not far from the door. That's a motel. If you've never been to a motel is where you park your car in front of the window of your room. The bathroom is at the end of the room, way in the back. Just watch Hitchcock's movie Psycho. You'll get the idea. That's what a motel room looks like. Or Pulp Fiction if you want to update for something more modern. Motels are rooms that were very different than the Marriott Courtyard. Marriott Courtyard, you have a bed that's towards the bathroom. What's near the window? A sitting area. Opposite the sitting area, maybe a desk. How many telephones? 2. Each one of those things are worth just a little bit of money to the consumer. You open up the window, hopefully you have a nicer view than you would at a motel. At a motel, you open up your window and there's some little 5-year-old kid with his nose against your window peeking in your room. So different kind of concept launched into the market, not necessarily downtown or at the airport, but along traffic routes where traveling salespeople would upgrade. They would pay beyond even their per diem to go to this home away from home, the Marriott Courtyard. What did Boeing discover? 2 killer attributes: overhead space and legroom. The very frequent travelers don't want to check in luggage. So what do? They don't wait to get on the airplane. They hurry. They get on the plane as quickly as they can because they want both legroom and overhead space. Because they don't check in luggage and they're primates, they will carry 2 items. They get on the plane quickly so that they can claim that overhead space, leaving leg room for them to stretch out and read a newspaper. It's only later when grandma comes in and there's no room, and that passenger will say, "Don't worry, lady, just stick it under your seat there, and here, have a newspaper." They basically hoard the overhead space. For those very frequent travelers, they were willing to switch airlines depending on what aircraft the airlines were purchasing. The very frequent travelers, they would prefer those Boeing formats with the large overhead space and very generous legroom. So that was determined via a conjoint analysis. So many industries now use this study. It's pretty much every industry that does it, and the applications are numerous. So in this video, what I'm going to do is describe to you what this conjoint's all about and give you a few tips on implementation. What is conjoint? Basically, if you read about it, it'll say estimate attribute utility weights by decomposing overall preference ratings. What in the heck does that mean? It means I want to measure what makes people happy and figure out how much money they're willing to trade for a bit of happiness. It's used for just about any kind of new product or service or modification of a service that you already got. Here's the basic idea. Never ever ask customers what they want. That's an irrelevant question. If I went to a customer and said, "Hey, how much are you willing to pay for these eyeglasses?" If they answer that question, they have an incentive to give me a number that's unprofitable. They're going to say, "How about free?" I don't really care what they think is a fair price or not. What I want to know is, how can I configure this product in such a way that I can make them happy, of course, but at the same time, I extract value in that exchange in the terms of profit. So rather than ask someone what they want, I give them trade-offs. I force them into trade-offs. That's why many people will call this trade-off analysis. So for example, I've got a mouse here. I've got just a regular old computer mouse, right? Now, I've got this mouse and I've got these glasses. I've got the two items here. And then I go to a consumer, I say, which would you prefer? This mouse for $4,000 or these eyeglasses for, $1? They'll take the glasses. I say, great. Now here's this mouse for $4,000 and these glasses, but these are $8,000, but they have internet connection where I can browse the internet by tapping the side of the eyeglasses. Which do you prefer then? I still like the mouse better, actually. And then you keep giving those trade-offs. I never ask them whether they want a mouse or whether they want eyeglasses, but I give them enough trade-offs where I can infer their utility for the different attributes across the different products. So instead of asking people direct questions of what they want, you give them trade-offs. They therefore reveal indirectly what is driving their choice process. And from that, we can figure out how to actually give them the products that they're most likely buy vis-a-vis existing competitive products. So what I'd like to do now is give you the methodology we use to implement conjoint analysis. Again, a revolutionary tool that's been used in dozens of industries. Just about every industry in the world has been touched by conjoint analysis. So let's get to the methodology. There's basically 5 steps to do a conjoint analysis. The very first step is you start extremely broadly, often with a focus group, maybe with managers, and you basically define the broad product objective space. For example, you don't say, let's design a small commuter airline with so much overhead space. You don't do that. That's too specific. You want the data to do the talking. We're in fact outsourcing core R&D to customers at this point. So you start very broadly. My wife and I had this discussion at one point where she had never seen me teach before, and she was wondering, what exactly do you talk about, Phil? And I was kind of explaining, well, we do a bunch of tools and things like that. Like what? She said, and I said, well, like conjoint analysis. And I said, for example, it can design anything in the world. She says, great. Why don't you design the optimal spouse, Phil? And I said, okay, that's a good project. Let's do the optimal spouse. You notice it's very broad. It doesn't say the blue-eyed, blonde-haired, buff actor who plays Thor. No. That's too specific. We want to see if that is the product that bubbles to the top to be the optimal spouse. Okay, so we've got some broad concept. We're going to design the optimal spouse. Step 2. You get a focus group, both engineers and consumers, and say, well, what are the attributes space that define what a spouse is? Now, in a group of 30 executives, it's a lot of fun. I have the women describe what an optimal spouse is, and they come up with attributes like things like caring, kindness, we'll do the dishes, we'll do poopy diapers, are humorous, are intelligent, are wealthy, have high income, and then they start running out of attributes. They kind of can't think of it anymore. And I then at that point say, well, you just demolished the male ego. Maybe we could add a couple of more attributes there, the ones that men think they've got. Let's put it that way. Okay. And my wife, when she did this study, she came up with an attribute I would have never imagined, and that was complaining behavior. I'm married over 30 years. Never would have imagined that she would have come up with this notion of complaining behavior. But, you listen to the customer and you put down the attributes. Okay, so step 2, you list the attributes. What's step 3? For each attribute, you then define the levels in that attribute over which you're likely to do engineering. Now, you want to look for extremes in this case. For example, if I'm doing a conjoint study where price is a variable, I definitely want to put a very low market price, even 0, offer it for free, and then offer it for such an outrageous price, literally demand would disappear. You want the entire length of the demand curve. If you only ask over a narrow range of prices, you'll never know what you can bundle with the product to extract higher prices. So you generally ask for a large range. For example, if someone did something in looks, you would never say ugly, average, and good for the looks of a spouse. That's not very clear. You might actually put a photograph of Mr. Bean, for example. You might put a photograph of Brad Pitt or Donald Trump, just so people understand what you mean by the word looks. So it's very clear. In the world of complaining behavior, how could we fill that out? Well, 0, never complains. 12, That's like once a month, 12 times a year. 52, once a week. 365, that's every single day complaints. And then 700, twice a day. So we have a large range of complaining behavior. Then what happens? After we've defined the levels, we then perform the studies. Now, I have to say, there's many different methodologies empirically to do this, right? Go to GitHub, you can find a number of them. Actually, a lot of people use custom software for this purpose. Maybe they use Sawtooth or some other software. By and large, it's a fancy regression analysis. Often it's using ranked order data. So we have this ordinal forms of regression analysis that we might apply, monotonic analysis of variance, and other different types of methods. So it really depends on the application, but by and large, we're doing a bunch of supervised machine learning tools suited for trade-off analysis. At the end of that, we get what? We get results. From those results, we simulate. We'll do a lot of simulations of different types of products through this artificial intelligence. Literally, the minds of hundreds of consumers are on the laptop, and then you say, if we launch this hotel, what % market share would we get? And the model would tell you. And then at that point you say, this looks like a good product. Let's look at the cost of that product. And if the costs are low and the amount people are willing to pay are high, and we think that the number of people that would switch are high as well, we've got a good winner. If the best product, however, is too costly and it won't sell that many, maybe we shouldn't innovate in this area. For my wife's case, what did we come up with? Turns out her number one attribute. I actually thought she married me for a couple of key attributes, but in fact, no, it's complaining behavior. She hates complaining behavior. I had no idea why, but I don't have this gene where I complain. Why? Because I'm apathetic. I just don't care. She says, hey honey, drive over the cliff. I say, let's go, man. So complaining behavior is her thing, and I just don't complain. That's why she hasn't dumped this hamster over the last 30 years. Now I know. What's interesting about that fact, however, now that I know that her killer attribute is complaining behavior, this actually infers power to me, because if I ever want switching behavior to happen, I know which button to push. Hey, Regine, hey, those shoes don't quite fit, your dress. They don't quite look right. Your haircut, I'm not sure that's a great haircut. What are you doing? Why are you wasting your time? Boom, she leaves. 3 or 4 complaints, gone, all right? So information is power. And conjoint analysis is an extremely valuable tool for product design and marketing. So what I'm going to do now is talk to you about a couple of the methodologies that people use in this space, a couple of the different design issues, and then we'll do a little demo for you a little bit later using some old school software. All right, so let's now talk about the methodologies. There are 2 broad methodologies you might want to think about. Let's think of the first class of methodologies is when you have extremely simple studies where there's only a couple of attributes. This was the early days of conjoint analysis. Some people would call it traditional or classical conjoint analysis, where you only have 1 or 2 attributes, in which case it's actually quite easy to simply fill out a matrix of numbers. Quickly fill out a matrix of numbers, maybe 3 matrices or 4, 5, 6, and boom, the study's over with. It's very quick, very easy to do. But some products are extremely complex. Why? They have a lot of attributes. In that case, if you had to do the matrix procedure, there'd just be too many matrices to fill out because every single attribute has to be traded off with every other attribute. It just becomes too unruly, boring, too long a survey. So we have something called the profile methodologies. Those profile methodologies actually are quite sophisticated, and they boil down the study to something that can be done very quickly. Now, those are the origins of conjoint analysis. It's gone quite farther than that in that we have what's called now adaptive conjoint analyses and adaptive methodologies. This is where as people answer the questionnaire is rewriting itself based on what people have answered. It's as if there was an artificial statistician in the software making choices about how the questionnaire should be rewritten. In other words, different people are actually answering different questionnaires to train the model. So That's where we are today with even more sophisticated techniques. So let's go to the origins. Let's talk about the matrix procedure. I was exposed to a study very early on, based on some of the work I did earlier, to the telecommunications and media companies, and this is one that relates to HBO. Way back in the good old days, they were thinking about how much money they could possibly price to bundle things like Showtime or other channels with HBO. Very common in the cable television industry. Because there's not that many attributes, service and price, very appropriate for traditional conjoint. You don't have that many attributes, so you might as well just do a 2x2 matrix. Let's do a little example, a thought experiment. Suppose we're going to do cable television, CATV. What are the attributes? This study has been done by just about every cable television company you can imagine. One attribute, let's call it price. The lowest price in the level, we might say $5 for the basic, and then it goes up from there. What's the other attribute? Let's call that service. How many levels of service are we going to look at? Well, let's do basic, basic plus premium plus internet or broadband. Now, this is a study you would do if you wanted to bundle broadband services with your cable operator. You could also add other things like mobile phone service, quadruple play, triple play, all these kinds of different ways of bundling telecommunication services together. What should we price it at? Classic design. Now, we create our 2x2 matrix. So we've got a 2x2 matrix where on one side we've got basic plus premium in the internet, and then we have the array of prices we might consider, starting with $5, going up to something, let's say, like $250. The spacing doesn't have to be equivalent, actually. We can do the study with any type of arrangement, as long as it's increasing typically, because that's the way consumers think of prices. Okay, now we've got this 12 products that we're faced with here in this 3x4 matrix. And we ask the consumer, which product would you prefer the cable company sell to you? They're going to look at it for a while and go, oh, this one seems logical. How about getting everything for the lowest price? Perfect. In some studies, people actually put the first number there to get people going that that's their most preferred choice. Then you say, thank you very much. What is your second preferred choice? And then people think about it and go, oh, that's a tough one. Do I pay the extra amount of money, or do I keep with it, but I lose the internet service? Now, the distribution to the answer of that question is worth money to a cable television operator. And so consumers will make their choice. Some people will actually keep the internet for quite a high price before they switch. Let's call that the internet buffs. The people that really want to have broadband and they don't have DSL or an alternative broadband connection. Okay, but another segment would have filled it out differently. They would have gone sticking with the cheapest price. 1, 2, and 3. Let's call that the cheapo segment. They are very price sensitive. Now, different cable operators discovered there were even other segments in the market. For example, some people would say, I'm actually going to pay not to have the internet. They'd put it out this way, 1, 2, and 3 across the attribute, which is basic plus premium. These are the couch potatoes. Either they already have broadband or they simply don't want to mess with it, right? They don't want to mess with having a set-top box and all this modem stuff. No, just give me television. Make it simple for me. And finally, there's another segment, 1, 2, and 3, where they're paying not to have the premium channel nor have the internet. That's prudish parents, perhaps in the Bible Belt or other regions of the United States, who simply don't want to have this uncensored content in their living room. That is the matrix procedure. What you just saw is something we call in strategy benefit segmentation. You don't segment based on necessarily demographics or something else. You're doing it based on the benefits, the attributes that the different segments value when facing trade-offs. So conjoint analysis is a very useful tool to do that. Again, this is the matrix procedure when there's few attributes, and then we will get some kind of quantitative results after that. What is the alternative methodology? This is when you have many attributes. Many people call that the profile method. So now let's go through the profile method. Okay, now let me explain how we think about the profile method. You have so many attributes and so many levels that to do matrices would be overwhelming. So let's imagine it this way. I type in all of the attributes and all the levels into a computer program. Again, software now exists that does this automatically. Imagine that then generates every possible product combination on its hard disk. Just imagine that happening. Then it does something. Now, using what we call experimental design, and there's many ways to do this. There's fractional factorial design or Latin square design. There's all these different methodologies whereby you do not randomly sample profiles. You don't do that. You don't randomly sample. You choose very particular profiles that allow you to extrapolate to the other profiles. This kind of experimental design, very common in agriculture and other fields where it's very expensive to implement every possible combination. So what we do is we treat these profiles as golden, and we say we only have enough time with the consumer to talk to them where they can compare maybe 20 profiles. So give me the best 20 profiles out of this data set. Now, often this is done using computer screens. It can be done online on the web. In the good old days, it was often done with paper cards, and it still can be done this way today. Imagine a computer program that gives you 20 profiles, and it's on pieces of paper. And each profile has a profile of, let's say, an automobile. And here we have 2 index cards of 2 automobiles, car number 1 and car number 2. You'll notice that there's miles per gallon, there's different prices, speed, capacity, length, maybe country of origin where they were manufactured. And you simply ask a consumer, here are 20 cards, index cards. Sort them into 2 piles for me. Cars you kind of like and cars you really don't like that much. And actually consumers can enjoy doing this. They just sort them into 2 piles. They're revealing, to some degree, their latent preferences. So they sort into 2 piles, and then you say, of the 10 cards that you kind of liked, separate them into 2 more piles of 5 and 5 each. And they do that. And then you say, of the ones you really like, those top 5, sort them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and just continue through the deck and hand the deck back to me. They're giving me back ordinal data that's ordered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as an example, right? And that's very interesting. Now, there's other ways to collect the data. I could actually say for each card, tell me how much you really like it. I really like or I really hate on a scale. Several ways to collect that data. Either way, I'm giving them the option of doing trade-offs between these different products so I can infer which attributes are more important or less important to the consumer. Now, if you ask a group of 30 executives to compare these cards, you'll find that a vast majority will prefer car number 1. I like a German car. There's some people will prefer the second car. What they like about that German car may be the fact that it's German. Maybe that's what they like. Or maybe it simply has a different passenger load and they have their family considerations or something like that. But either way, no matter what the reason, they are willing to pay a higher price for something. Now, with only 2 cards, you cannot tell. But because we have 20 cards, we will be able to infer what's driving their happiness or their utility. The output of this exercise is on the following diagram. This is what? These are the, think of them as bar charts or utility charts for the different attributes and the levels within each attribute. This is one of the earliest conjoint studies published, as the previous ones were, very early on in the history of conjoint analysis. Now, imagine a scenario where 2 companies are competing. This was the diagram that Paul Green shared with me, who was probably one of the big founders of the field of marketing science. He basically said, imagine TWA competing against British Airways, and maybe TWA's market share is going down. Now, TWA is preferred. Let's look at that first bar chart. There's 2 carriers, 2 brands are there, BA and TWA. TWA has higher brand equity. On the vertical axis, we have utility. Let's put a happy face there. It's how happy people are. Now, let's look at the second attribute, aircraft type. Aircraft type. It also has the same scale from 0 to 1, happiness. I'm literally comparing an aircraft type to a brand. I'm comparing apples and oranges on the same scale. This is a miracle. How is this even possible? And if you look across these different dimensions, you can focus your attention on the 2 key or 3 key attributes that are going to drive switching, that'll drive preferences. Now, let's do a profile here. Let's say I'm TWA, and I circle TWA, and I'm flying Boeing 707s. I have, half an hour relative to the ideal departure time. I am often late. I have 70% passenger load. I have no stops en route. I have cold and curt flight attendants, and I'm offering a movie. That's my current position in the market. Okay. Question. what should TWA do to win back some of its customers who might be going to British Airways? Now, they like TWA, maybe for their frequent flyer program, but I'm still losing some of them. What's going on here? Well, according to this diagram, 2 killer attributes. One is cold and curt flight attendants, and the other is often late. Then it gets to productions, HR, and marketing. The conjoint analysis reveals the strategic problem my firm is facing, but you then have to implement a strategy to move along those dimensions. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time here talking about the post-conjoint analysis that takes place. I do this supervised machine learning to learn what the customers are thinking. I let the customers design the next generation hotel, the next generation aircraft. Of course, they give the broad dimensionality. It's actually engineers who build and design the final product, but it's the consumers that drive the core design. In this case, cold and curt flight attendants. Well, that's not a great thing. We've got to make them warm and friendly. Well, about 25, 30 years of research in services marketing has indicated that becoming warm and friendly is not exactly the thing that maybe people are looking for. If you recall unsupervised machine learning, in most service environments, the beaches people compete on, one of them is often called attentiveness. And if you want to be high on attentiveness, the literature has now pointed that warm and friendly may not be the way to do it, but maybe instead you need to focus on 2 key management issues. One, standardization, and the second is detail management. That's what you need to move from one attribute level to another. Standardization and detail management. This literature is rather vast, but the basic idea is the second moment of a distribution may outweigh the first moment. If you remember back to your statistics class, the variance is the second moment and the mean is the first moment of a distribution. So what we're looking at is, in services, it's the variance that matters, not the mean. Imagine there's 2 hamburger stands. One hamburger stands where they're absolutely delicious hamburgers, but 2 out of 10 times you get food poisoning and have to go to the hospital and get really sick. Versus another hamburger stand where the hamburgers they're okay and you never get sick. Which one do you prefer to go to? Typically the one with lower variance. So the key to success is minimizing the variance. In essence, your human resources, if they're offering the service, literally should become robotic in their behavior and be evaluated on how excellent they are at executing that standard. The way I explain it in executive forms is that you want to find the binder. I did a number of programs for a lot of successful companies, Singapore Airlines, Cathay Pacific, etc. Those are highly rated airlines, which makes no sense. Why do some airlines have higher ratings than others? Every airline can observe every other airline. They can all copy each other, and yet some are much better. Now, you might attribute it to labor unions and other kinds of things, but even at that level, you'll notice high variance in certain airplanes. Have you ever gone to an American airline like Delta or another, and you'll notice that people are pushing a cart down the middle, the flight attendants, and they're literally looking up in the air and saying, anybody need drinks? And they keep walking and they're looking and they walk to the back of the plane. That's low service quality, low attentiveness. You go to Singapore Airlines, and what do? They bend their knee in a Tai Chi, they address you right to your face, and then they serve your drink with the left hand, because if they use their right hand, their elbow might hit you in the shoulder or in the nose. In American Airlines, it's just, in US-based airlines, what you see is, oh my gosh, anything for you, hun? How about you? And they throw peanuts to the third person. Total chaos, total chaos. So my recommendation, if you want to improve service quality in your organization, find the binder. I was doing a program for a large hotel chain here in Asia, one of the top-rated quality hotels on service, and I walked up and I said, listen, I'm so impressed by this hotel. Can I speak to the manager to just ask you about your service? And out comes the manager. And I said, I'm teaching your group of executives here. Can I talk to you about your your service quality, goes to his office. He pulls out a binder this thick. This binder was amazing. It had every freaking detail you can imagine that a consumer has with their staff. Every possible outcome. A child gets ill, something happens, someone tripped, everything you can think of. This thick, the binder. Every detail was standardized what you would do. In this hotel chain, and some of you might recognize it, you get out of the cab. If their eyes intersect with your eyes, they will pivot to you. If they pivot to you and you don't pivot to them, nothing happens. But they're ready for you. So as you walk through this hotel, eyes are tracking you. And then if ever you turn towards them, they will say, "Good morning, sir," or "Good morning, ma'am." And that's right after you get out of the cab. Someone cleaning the plants, "Good morning, ma'am." "Good morning, sir." Someone going at the front, "Good morning, good morning." You're walking in the elevator, someone's cleaning, "Good morning." You say good morning back. You're walking down the hotel, down the hallway. Someone's door's open. You peek in. It's a maid. "Hello, sir." And you go, "Oh, excuse me." And you keep walking. You're bombarded on the first day. On the first day, I was kind of annoyed by this, and that's quite common. A little bit annoyed. But on the second day, I start getting into this tea plantation mood. Like, maybe I own this place. So people are blasting me with hello, hello, good morning, and I'm just shaking my head. Keep up the good job. I'm just absorbing this whole thing, and I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying the environment. How did this happen that I feel so good? Is because that binder exists. It gives me super high levels of detail, but that standardization at that level of detail needs to be followed up with detail management. What's detail management? Making sure that people execute to the binder. And often you'll have people test that. So that's how we go up that curve. Warning. This little story, conjoint leads to management, is a very common one. For those of you going international, doing multinational, this machine learning thing will give you general directions, but the implementation of it may vary from culture to culture. The US culture also demands standardization and detail management. So does the French culture. But what you implement might be different in one place versus another. For example, when you go to an American restaurant, if you've ever been in an American restaurant, there'll be some guy who walks up to you and say, "Hi, I'm Ken, how are you?" And then he'll notice that you speak with an accent. "Where are you from? Where are you from?" "Oh, you're from Belgium? Yeah, I've been to South America. Listen, here's our specials." Europeans are freaked out by this Ken guy. They're like hiding their wallets. What does this guy want? They're not used to this approach. But it is highly standardized to American taste. The next people who come in, he'll walk up. "Hi, I'm Ken. Hey, that's an interesting accent. Where are you from? Holland? Yeah, I've been to South America. Listen, here's our special." Identical. Americans love this. They love it. It's standardized, and it's based on detail management. You use this approach in another culture, it may not work. If I used another culture's approach in North America, it may not work. For example, what if I approach an American household and I'm a French garçon? I'll walk up and I'll simply go, "What? What?" That's the French approach. "What?" The Americans will go, "Oh my God, did you see the server? Man, that guy's totally bummed out. Jesus. Well, maybe his mom died or something. Let's ask him." And then all of a sudden they'll say, "Hey, buddy, is everything okay here? Have a seat. Let's chat this out." Totally different culture in North America. Just the way it is. That's the way you have service call. But what about in France? What about in France? What are they looking for? Have you ever been to a Michelin 3-star restaurant? It is pure theater. They want to be attended to. So it's the same dimension, same hoteling beach, but the methodology is very, very different. Very, very different. In the French environment, in the French culture, people want to have good conversations and good foods, but they want to have high service quality. The last thing they want is to be interrupted. In an American restaurant, a couple will be eating. They'll have eaten 3 or 4 fork loads of food. Then the server will walk up and say, "How's the food? Is everything okay?" The European has the focus, "Oh my gosh, They've been eating this food and the server's asking how good the food is. The food all right? Is there poisoning? Is the chef dead in the back room? What happened? Why are you asking them about the food quality? In France, you don't ask about the food quality. In American culture, it's quite common because if it's not prepared to your taste, you can take it back to the kitchen and they'll do what they can to make it prepared better for you. But in the French culture, the chef determines what's the best cuisine, so you rarely hear, or how do you think the food quality is, right? You just don't see this kind of thing. But the French still want to be attended to. So what you'll notice is two people are talking to each other, right? And the server will notice that a fork is just a little bit off the fork. And so what will the server do? The server won't even look at the couple who's speaking to each other. Don't want to interrupt them. And he'll just walk by. He'll tweak the fork, and that's it. He won't say a word. The French won't say a word. Nothing will happen. In America, if someone walked up and tweaked the fork, someone might say, hey, buddy, it just touched my fork. Give me another fork. Won't work in North America. Different culture. But both cultures have highly standardized treatment. In the world of being on time, aircraft, they need to be more on time. Now, that's due to weather. That's due to other things we don't control, maybe other airlines, right? So how are we going to handle that? Very simply, what we're going to do is we're going to change certain things to make sure that we're more timely in some cases, or at least perceptually more on time. For example, we simply don't put on the boarding passes the arrival time. We're like sheep, we get on the plane, but we don't know when the plane is going to arrive necessarily. So those people won't even know we're late. Second thing we can do is that we can have people board far earlier. Make sure they're on board earlier. Another thing we can do is we can make the earth spin faster. Right? How's that? Well, back in the 1990s and so, it was often that we would arrive, late. It would just happen once in a while. Now, we seem to be arriving early all the time. And the pilot would get on and say, it looks like we're arriving early. We had favorable tailwinds. And that's a really odd thing. There weren't many tailwinds in the 1990s. So imagine right now the earth must be spinning a little bit quicker. The funnest thing I ever saw was from British Airways, where you had the multiple nationalities in the cockpit, maybe an Italian and a Brit, pilot, co-pilot. Turns out the flight leaving London going to Rome arrives faster, as long as one of them is an Italian. Not because they can talk Italian to the air traffic controllers. No. Why does it arrive sooner? Because one of the two people wants to go home. There's something called crew delay, where they miss the shuttle bus maybe from the hotel. If that happens, the plane is delayed because they have to do the pre-flight check and all of that. So what do? You make sure one of them is Italian. That way, at least one of them won't be late because the Italian wants to go home. And what happens is the Brit, Nigel, will also show up more on time. Why? Because if Nigel is late and Giovanni doesn't get home on time, what does Giovanni do to the Brit on the flight from Rome to London? Will basically be late to retaliate against the Brit. So there's an esprit de corps. I didn't believe this when I first heard this story. Then it was confirmed to me later on. So maybe an HR policy. Lesson is, conjoint analysis is a great tool to understand consumer preferences, but after you've done the study, you still have to do quite a bit of homework on how to implement it in the field and estimate its impact on strategic intent. In the next few slides here, what I'm going to do is summarize a few basic takeaways about conjoint. And then I'm going to end the video, and then in a small video, I'm going to give you a little quick and dirty demonstration about how one might do conjoint analysis. One of the most popular methodologies for doing conjoint analysis is using software specifically designed for this purpose. I've found over the years that Sawtooth software has been pretty good at this. There's other plugins you can use in Excel, for example, that are statistical packages you can use as well. So I'm not going to be too much of an advocate. You can program in Python and R conjoint analysis as well. But what's interesting about Sawtooth is that they pioneered this idea of creating adaptive conjoint, where as you answer the questionnaire rewrites itself. So how many people would never buy a pickup truck? Many people would never buy a pickup truck. So why should I ask persons to trade off pickup truck against all these other attributes? That's just a lot of work and not that much insight. So it may ask a few questions up front, like, would you ever consider doing a pickup truck? dink, nope, and it rewrites the questionnaire. No longer seeing pickup truck. So adaptive conjoint is a very powerful tool. In addition to that, you can see that conjoint has been used across a number of different industries, and it's used for a number of different things like pricing, segmentation, new product design, distribution, etc. Used for many different things. How do we actually get the attributes and the level in a conjoint study? Well, often we use experts, we use interviews of individuals or groups to kind of get those attributes. And then how do we describe the products in the study itself? Often it's verbal descriptions, like in the cable television example. It could be pictures, diagrams, but very commonly we'll use prototypes, actual products, especially those that have sensation, like smell or taste. If you say lavender without people smelling lavender, they often won't understand what that actually means. How many different methodologies are there? As I said before, we have full profile, matrix, maybe hybrid versions of each of these things. You use what's most appropriate typically. How big should the sample size be? That's a big question. And I'm going to address that in another video on sample size determination. But the basic idea is this. You want to minimize the cost and maximize the profits, right? So conjoint's like anything else. I had a consultant write me an email once and literally said, "Hey, Phil, is a sample size of 1 statistically valid?" And I wrote back and I said, "Why is the sample size 1? And he goes, "Well, because my client only has 1 customer." And I wrote back, "Well, that's a census. Of course a sample size of 1 is valid. That's not even a sample. That's an irrelevant question. You don't have to worry about statistical significance at that point. The conjoint analysis will reveal that one person's preferences. So definitely a sample size of 1 is valid." And you can use this tool on a sample size of 1. You don't need, quote, big data. And when you do these types of studies, you often stratify the sample ahead of time by preconceived notions of segments. For example, elderly or young or youth, etc. So you would actually take small strata that you think are already interesting from previous portfolio analyses, and you would sample within those. Within those, you would find substrata or micro segments. Now, lastly, I want to leave you with this, an entire checklist of things you might want to think about if you're ever going to do a conjoint analysis, and revisit this video to look at this list. These ideas about warnings, about using conjoint analysis actually apply to all survey-based research, supervised or unsupervised, that we use in strategy and strategic planning. The list is always the same. Is the questionnaire too boring? Is it too complicated? Is it too long, etc.? But there's one in particular towards the bottom that I want to spend 2 minutes on, and that is what? Have I left out important attributes? If you leave out something important, you're going to have what's called a specification error. That's true in every business framework. Even in SWOT analysis, if you leave out the T of SWOT analysis, you may have an incomplete model, and therefore your conclusions might be biased in one direction or another. So the idea of a specification is not new, but in conjoint analysis, for some reason, it seems to be the biggest problem. What is the variables that people leave out of their conjoint studies? I'll boil it down simply to say the competition. Many people do a conjoint study on what they conceive their product to be, not reflecting the choices consumers have. For example, if you're going to do a conjoint analysis on the electric car, people will start with the attributes. Well, there's the battery charge, there's the range, there's the price, there's the luxuriousness of the car, and they go all the way through it. Great. And you design an electric car. Perfect. Turns out you launch that car, everyone hates it. That was the experience of North American car manufacturers when they talked about their conjoint analyses. They basically said, we forgot to include an attribute. When you include that attribute, all the bar charts and line charts pummel across all the other attributes the minute you include it. And what was that missing attribute? It's the competition. Engine type, gas or electric. You put that in the conjoint study and it becomes the most important attribute, and these other things almost become unimportant at that point, which means if you don't include the competitive space, then you can't use this tool to actually compete. So you start by profiling what the competitors already have and make sure they're embedded within your study. And then you build your innovations on top of that basic study, that basic design. This little hint can carry you a long ways, because in many cases, people in data analytics and data science literally look at their consumer data, what they have. But strategy often is about what you can do beyond what you've done. Well, what you can do beyond what you've done, you may have to collect data on what the perceptions of the consumer has of the competitor's attributes and their levels. At that point, you can simulate. How often should you do this type of a conjoint study? Once in a while, not too often. So that's a big introduction to once a year, once every other year. Preferences don't change that much. How often should you do conjoint studies? Once in a while, once every year or two. It depends on how big your organization is and how dynamic your market is. But it's a fairly expensive study to implement. It's very time consuming, but it's actually worth it if product design is a key aspect of your strategy moving forward. So in the next video, what we're going to cover is a simple little cryptic example. This video, a broad overview. What is conjoint analysis used for? It's used to compete. It's used to outsource the decision making on pricing and product design to the consumer. I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.